You think you know family greed until your eccentric aunt dies and leaves you her entire $2 million estate instead of her perfect children, and suddenly everyone you thought you could trust is willing to commit fraud, forgery, and worse, to steal what's rightfully yours. But what my aunt really left me wasn't just money. It was a massive collection of evidence proving that my respectable family members are criminals who've been stealing from elderly relatives for decades. Hi everyone, I'm Sophie, and I need to tell you about the inheritance that destroyed my entire family and revealed secrets so dark that some of my relatives are now in prison. Let me start by telling you about my great-aunt Millicent. Aunt Millie was 87 when she died, and she was what you might politely call eccentric. She had never married, had no children, and lived alone in a huge Victorian house that she'd inherited from her parents. Millie was a retired librarian who had spent her entire life collecting books, art, and what the rest of my family called junk. Her house was packed floor to ceiling with antiques, first edition books, vintage jewelry, and items that looked worthless but were often quite valuable. The family had always treated Millie like she was a burden. She was invited to family gatherings out of obligation, but people rolled their eyes at her stories about her travels, her art collection, and her various charitable interests. My cousins called her crazy old Aunt Millie behind her back. My uncles complained that she was wasting the family money on her collecting hobbies instead of being practical with her finances. But I had always liked Aunt Millie. When I was a kid, I loved visiting her house because it was like a museum full of interesting things. She would tell me stories about her travels around the world, show me rare books, and teach me about art and history. As I got older, I was one of the few family members who still made an effort to visit her regularly. I'd stop by every few weeks to check on her, help with errands, and just spend time listening to her stories. I knew Millie had money. She owned her house outright, had a good pension from her library career, and had made some smart investments over the years. But I had no idea how much money she really had until the day her lawyer called me. 3 days after Aunt Millie's funeral, I got a call from a lawyer I'd never heard of. Miss Peterson, this is Robert Hayes from Hayes, Mitchell & Associates. I was your Aunt Millicent's attorney, and I need to speak with you about her estate. Okay. Is there something I need to sign or some paperwork to handle? Miss Peterson, I think we should meet in person to discuss this. Are you available to come to my office tomorrow? Something about his tone made me nervous. Is everything okay? Is there a problem with the estate? There's no problem, but there are some significant matters we need to discuss. I'd prefer to explain everything in person. I agreed to meet with him the next day, assuming there might be some small bequest or perhaps some of Millie's books that she wanted me to have. I could not have been more wrong. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, Mr. Hayes sat me down and handed me a thick document. Miss Peterson, your aunt left you her entire estate. I'm sorry, what do you mean by entire estate? I mean everything. The house, all of her possessions, her investment accounts, her art collection, everything. You are the sole beneficiary of Millicent's will. I stared at him in confusion. But what about my uncles? What about my cousins? Surely she left them something. No, she did not. According to her will, you inherit everything, and the rest of the family receives nothing. How much? I mean, what's the value of the estate? Mr. Hayes consulted his papers. The preliminary estimate is approximately $2.1 million. I nearly fell out of my chair. $2 million. Aunt Millie had left me $2 million. Mr. Hayes, I think there might be some mistake. I wasn't particularly close to Aunt Millie compared to other family members. Why would she leave me everything? Your aunt was very specific about her reasons. She left you a letter explaining her decision. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Millie's distinctive handwriting. I opened the envelope with shaking hands and began reading Aunt Millie's letter. My dear Sophie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably very confused about why I've left you my entire estate. Let me explain. Over the past 10 years, I have discovered that several members of our family have been stealing from me and from other elderly relatives. They think I'm a foolish old woman who doesn't pay attention to her finances, but I've been documenting their crimes for years. Your Uncle Richard has been forging my signature on checks and stealing money from my accounts. Your Uncle Thomas has been taking items from my house during visits and selling them without my knowledge. Your cousins Jennifer and Michael have been using my credit card information to make unauthorized purchases. But the worst discovery was that they've been doing this to other elderly family members as well. Your great-aunt Dorothy, your grandfather's brother Edward, and your cousin Margaret's grandmother have all been victims of their systematic theft. I have extensive documentation of all of these crimes hidden in my house. I've also hired a private investigator to gather additional evidence. Everything is waiting for you in my safe deposit box and in the secret room behind the bookshelf in my library. I'm leaving everything to you because you're the only family member who has shown me genuine care and respect over the years. You're also the only one I trust to use this evidence to bring justice for all the elderly relatives who have been victimized. The money I'm leaving you comes with a responsibility. Expose the truth about what they've been doing and make sure they face consequences for their actions. I know this will be difficult and that the family will turn against you. But you're stronger than you know, and you're the only one I can trust to do what's right. With love and confidence in your integrity, Aunt Millicent. P.S. The combination to the safe is your birthday, May 17th, 92. The secret room is accessed by pulling the red leather book titled Family Histories on the third shelf. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications sunk in. Aunt Millie hadn't just left me money. She had left me evidence that multiple family members were criminals who had been systematically stealing from elderly relatives for years. And she expected me to use that evidence to bring them to justice. The family's reaction. Word of my inheritance spread through the family within hours of my meeting with the lawyer. My phone started ringing immediately. The first call was from my Uncle Richard, Millie's nephew and the presumed heir to her estate. Sophie, I just heard about Aunt Millie's will. Obviously, there's been some kind of mistake. I don't think there's been a mistake, Uncle Richard. The lawyer was very clear. Sophie, honey, Aunt Millie was 87 years old and not thinking clearly in her final years. There's no way she intended to leave her entire estate to you instead of her direct family members. The will was written 3 years ago, and the lawyer says she was completely mentally competent. Look, we need to contest this will. It's clearly the result of undue influence or elder abuse. Did you manipulate Aunt Millie into changing her will? The accusation hit me like a slap in the face. Uncle Richard, I would never manipulate anyone, especially not Aunt Millie. Then how do you explain her leaving everything to you instead of her actual family? Maybe she had reasons for her decision that you don't know about. What reasons? Sophie, be reasonable. You're a 30-year-old with student loans and a modest job. Suddenly inheriting $2 million doesn't make sense unless something inappropriate happened. I'm not going to discuss this further until I've had time to process everything. Sophie, I'm going to give you some advice as your uncle who cares about you. Contest this will yourself and ask for it to be divided equally among family members. If you try to keep money that doesn't rightfully belong to you, it's going to tear this family apart. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office and tried to collect my thoughts. Uncle Richard's reaction told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't grieving his aunt or trying to understand her decision. He was immediately jumping to accusations and threats. And he had no idea that I now had evidence of his crimes against the woman he was supposedly mourning. That evening, I drove to Aunt Millie's house with the key the lawyer had given me. Walking through her house after reading her letter was a surreal experience. Everything looked the same, but now I was seeing it through different eyes. I went straight to the library and found the red leather book titled Family Histories. When I pulled it, a section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing a small room I had never known existed. The room was like a detective's office. The walls were covered with documents, photographs, and timelines. There were boxes of evidence organized by family member and type of crime. In the center of the room was a desk with a thick folder labeled for Sophie. Inside the folder was a detailed summary of everything Aunt Millie had discovered. Uncle Richard's crimes. Forged Millie's signature on 23 checks over 2 years, stealing $47,000. Used power of attorney documents that he had forged to access her investment accounts. Stole and sold several valuable antiques from her house, worth approximately $25,000. Had done similar thefts from 2 other elderly relatives. Uncle Thomas's crimes. Systematically stolen small valuable items during family visits over 4 years. Sold stolen items through online auction sites using fake accounts. Total estimated theft, $38,000 in antiques, jewelry, and collectibles. Had convinced elderly Aunt Dorothy to lend him $15,000 that he never repaid. Cousin Jennifer's crimes. Used Millie's credit card information to make online purchases totaling $12,000. Had set up automatic payments from Millie's account to pay her own bills. Convinced Millie to co-sign loans that Jennifer had no intention of repaying. Had targeted other elderly relatives with similar credit card fraud. Cousin Michael's crimes. Convinced elderly relatives to invest in fake business opportunities. Collected over $85,000 from family members for businesses that didn't exist. Used forged documents to make himself power of attorney for great-uncle Edward. Stole $34,000 from Edward's accounts before Edward's death. But the most shocking discovery was a folder labeled The Network. Aunt Millie had uncovered that my relatives weren't just individually stealing from elderly family members. They were working together in a coordinated scheme to systematically target and defraud every elderly person in our extended family. They had a system for sharing information about which relatives had money, which ones were becoming mentally frail, and which ones were most vulnerable to different types of scams. Over the past decade, they had stolen an estimated $340,000 from 7 different elderly family members. The next day, I went to the bank to access Aunt Millie's safe deposit box. Inside, I found even more evidence: original documents, recorded phone conversations, photographs, and a complete financial analysis of each family member's crimes. But I also found something that broke my heart: letters from elderly family members who had tried to report the thefts but were dismissed by other family members as confused or paranoid. Great-uncle Edward had written to Millie 2 years before his death. "Millie, I think Michael is stealing from me, but no one believes me. My bank statements show withdrawals I didn't make, but everyone says I'm just forgetting things. I'm scared and I don't know what to do." Aunt Dorothy had written, "Thomas borrowed money from me 6 months ago and promised to pay it back, but now he won't return my calls. When I asked Richard about it, he said I was being greedy and that families should help each other without expecting repayment. I feel so foolish." These elderly relatives had known they were being victimized, but the family had gaslit them into thinking they were just confused or demanding. Reading their letters made me realize that Aunt Millie wasn't just giving me an inheritance. She was giving me the responsibility to get justice for people who had died without ever receiving it. The family pressure escalates. Over the next week, the pressure from my family became intense and increasingly ugly. My cousin Jennifer called crying, "Sophie, please don't let money tear our family apart. Aunt Millie would be heartbroken to see us fighting over her estate. Jennifer, did you know that Aunt Millie discovered you'd been using her credit cards without permission?" Silence. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about. I have documentation of $12,000 in unauthorized charges you made on her cards." "That's impossible. I never used Aunt Millie's credit cards. The charges include purchases from stores near your house for items you posted about on social media. There are photos of you wearing jewelry you bought with her stolen credit card information. Sophie, you're being manipulated by some kind of fraud. Someone must be setting me up. Jennifer, I have recorded phone conversations where you discuss using Aunt Millie's cards." Another silence. Then, "Look, maybe I borrowed her cards a few times, but she said it was okay. It wasn't stealing. Did she say it was okay to set up automatic bill payments from her account to pay your rent?" That was a misunderstanding. I was going to pay her back. For 2 years. Jennifer hung up on me. My Uncle Thomas tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment unannounced. "Sophie, we need to talk about this inheritance situation." "Uncle Thomas, I'm not discussing the estate with family members until I've made some decisions." "Decisions? Sophie, there are no decisions to make. That will is obviously invalid, and we're going to contest it." "On what grounds?" "Undue influence, elder abuse, mental incompetence. Take your pick. No competent person leaves their entire estate to a grandniece instead of their direct family. Maybe competent people don't leave their money to relatives who've been stealing from them." Thomas's face changed. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that Aunt Millie knew you'd been stealing from her and from other elderly family members." "That's a serious accusation, Sophie." I hope you have evidence to back up that kind of slander. I do have evidence. Extensive evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves you've stolen approximately $38,000 worth of antiques and collectibles from Aunt Millie's house over the past 4 years. Thomas stood up abruptly. Sophie, you're making a big mistake here. You don't want to go down this road. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. If you try to destroy this family with false accusations based on the paranoid delusions of a senile old woman, there will be consequences. Get out of my apartment. This isn't over, Sophie. After Thomas left, I called the lawyer and reported the implicit threat. He advised me to document all interactions with family members and consider getting a restraining order if the threats escalated. The will contest. 2 weeks after I learned about my inheritance, 4 family members filed a joint lawsuit contesting Aunt Millie's will. Uncle Richard, Uncle Thomas, Cousin Jennifer, and Cousin Michael claimed that Aunt Millie was mentally incompetent when she wrote the will. I had exercised undue influence over her. The will was the result of elder abuse. The estate should be divided equally among all family members. They hired an expensive lawyer and began a campaign to portray me as a manipulative gold digger who had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. Their lawyer sent me a settlement offer. I could keep $200,000 from the estate, and the rest would be divided among the family members who were contesting the will. This is a generous offer that allows you to benefit from your relationship with your aunt while ensuring that her estate is distributed fairly among all family members, the settlement letter read. I showed the letter to Mr. Hayes, Aunt Millie's lawyer. Sophie, I have to ask, are you prepared for what's going to happen if you fight this contest and reveal the evidence your aunt left you? What do you mean? Your family members aren't just going to face losing the will contest. They're going to face criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, theft, and potentially conspiracy charges. Some of them could go to prison. Mr. Hayes, they've been systematically stealing from elderly family members for years. They've taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who trusted them. They've gaslit victims into thinking they were confused or paranoid. They threatened me when I refused to give them money they have no right to. I understand your position, and I think your aunt would be proud of your decision. But I want you to understand that once we present this evidence in court, there's no going back. Your family will never forgive you. My family has been systematically victimizing elderly relatives for years. If they never forgive me for exposing that, then they weren't really family to begin with. I decided to fight the will contest and present all of Aunt Millie's evidence in court. Before the will contest went to trial, I took all of Aunt Millie's evidence to the police and the district attorney's office. The detective I spoke with was shocked by the scope and organization of the evidence. Ma'am, this is one of the most comprehensive cases of elder abuse documentation I've ever seen. Your aunt essentially conducted a professional investigation. She hired a private investigator and documented everything for years. The evidence here suggests systematic financial abuse of multiple elderly victims over at least a decade. We're talking about serious felony charges for everyone involved. Within a month, criminal charges were filed against all 4 family members who were contesting the will. Uncle Richard, elder abuse, forgery, theft, conspiracy. Uncle Thomas, elder abuse, theft, fraud, conspiracy. Cousin Jennifer, credit card fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. Cousin Michael, investment fraud, elder abuse, theft, forgery. The charges carried potential sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years in prison. But the criminal charges also revealed something I hadn't expected. There were additional victims. The police investigation uncovered that my relatives had been targeting elderly people outside our family as well. They had been using the same techniques to defraud elderly neighbors, church members, and community members. The total scope of their crimes was estimated at over $800,000 stolen from more than 15 elderly victims. The family civil war. Once the criminal charges became public, my extended family split into 2 camps, those who supported me and those who believed I was destroying the family. My parents initially tried to stay neutral, but they eventually supported my decision to expose the crimes. Sophie, what your uncles and cousins did was wrong, my mother said. Aunt Millie trusted you to do the right thing, and you're doing it. But other family members were furious with me. My grandmother, Richard and Thomas's mother, called me, Sophie, you've destroyed this family. Your uncles made some mistakes, but they don't deserve to go to prison. Grandma, they didn't make mistakes. They committed systematic fraud against elderly family members for over a decade. They were helping family members with their finances. Sometimes elderly people need assistance managing their money. They were stealing, Grandma. They forged signatures, used credit cards without permission, and lied to cover up their crimes. I've known Richard and Thomas their entire lives. They're good men who would never hurt anyone. Grandma, I have recorded conversations where they laugh about stealing from Aunt Millie and call her a stupid old bat who deserves to have her money taken. Those recordings could be fake. You can't trust anything these days. Even when presented with overwhelming evidence, some family members chose to believe that I was lying rather than accept that their relatives were criminals. The trial testimony. The will contest trial became a public spectacle because of the criminal charges and the amount of money involved. I had to testify about my relationship with Aunt Millie and present the evidence she had left me. Miss Peterson, how often did you visit your aunt in the years before her death? I visited her every 2 or 3 weeks, usually staying for several hours. What did you do during these visits? We would talk about books, art, her travels, and current events. I helped her with errands and household tasks. Sometimes we would organize her collections or work on projects together. Did your aunt ever express concerns about other family members? Yes. She told me on several occasions that she was worried about money disappearing from her accounts and items missing from her house. Did she ask for your help with these concerns? She asked me to help her organize her financial documents and to be present when she met with her lawyer to update her will. Did you encourage her to leave you money in her will? No, I had no idea what her will contained until after her death. She never discussed her estate plans with me. The lawyer for the family members contesting the will tried to portray me as manipulative and greedy. Miss Peterson, isn't it convenient that you're the only family member who can testify about these alleged crimes? I'm not the only one who knew about them. Aunt Millie documented everything and hired professionals to investigate. But you're the only family member who claims your aunt discussed these concerns with you. Actually, several elderly family members tried to report these crimes to other relatives, but they were dismissed as confused or paranoid. I have their letters describing their concerns. Letters that conveniently support your version of events. Letters that were written years before Aunt Millie's death, when the writers had no knowledge of her estate plans. When the recorded conversations and financial evidence were presented, the opposition lawyer had no response. The jury heard Uncle Richard's voice laughing about the old bat finally signing another check and Cousin Jennifer discussing how easy it was to use Millie's cards because she never checks her statements. The verdicts. The will contest was decided in my favor. The jury found that Aunt Millie was mentally competent when she wrote her will and that her decision to exclude family members was based on her knowledge of their crimes against her. I was awarded the entire estate as specified in Aunt Millie's will. But the criminal trial verdicts were even more satisfying. Uncle Richard, guilty on all charges, sentenced to 12 years in prison. Uncle Thomas, guilty on all charges, sentenced to 8 years in prison. Cousin Jennifer, guilty on all charges, sentenced to 6 years in prison. Cousin Michael, guilty on all charges, sentenced to 15 years in prison. All 4 were also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling over $800,000. The judge was particularly harsh in his sentencing remarks. You preyed on elderly family members who trusted you and loved you. You stole not just their money, but their dignity and peace of mind in their final years. Your crimes represent a fundamental betrayal of the most basic human bonds. Update. 2 of my relatives were released from prison last year after serving their minimum sentences. They've both tried to contact me to reconcile, but I'm not interested in having relationships with people who spent years systematically victimizing elderly family members. Some boundaries are permanent, and that's okay. Have you ever discovered that family members were taking advantage of elderly relatives? How do you balance family loyalty with protecting vulnerable people from abuse? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments.